Friends, if you want to watch super hit movie Time Cute in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, friends. In today's video, the movie we're going to talk about is called Time Cut. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it, all the interesting facts about this movie. In today's video, I am going to tell you. I am also going to give you all the information on which platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. Also, we will talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production, filming, post-production, budget, box office count of this film. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will also give you a small review of the story of this film. Apart from this, we will discuss about the facts of this film's storyline, starcast, actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. That's why I request you, friends, to watch this video till the end. So let's start the video. Time Cut is a 2024 American science fiction slasher film directed by MacPherson, who co-wrote the screenplay with Michael Kennedy. It stars Madison Bailey, Antonia Gentry, and Griffin Gluck. The plot follows a girl, Bailey, who travels back in time in 2003 by accident and attempts to save her older sister, Gentry, from a masked killer. The film was released by Netflix on October 30th, 2024. Premise: a high school senior student and amateur inventor accidentally finds it's a time machine and travels back to 2003, the year her sister was murdered by an unknown killer. Cast: Madison Bailey as Lucy, Summer's younger sister; Antonia Gentry as Summer, Lucy's older sister; Michael Shanks as Gil, Lucy and Summer's father; Griffin Gluck as Quinn, a physics genius and Lucy's helper; Megan Best as Emmy; Summer's best friend, Samuel Braun as Ethan; Sidney Sabiston as Val; Katame O'Connor as Brian; Rachel Crawford as Kendra, Lucy and Summer's mother. Production. In May 2021, it was announced that a script written by Michael Kennedy and Sono Patel would be directed by MacPherson. Madison Bailey and Antonia Gentry were the first cast members announced to star in the film. Additional cast members were revealed when a 2024 release was announced. Filming was to take place in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, between June 21st and July 28th, 2021. Principal photography eventually began on July 6th and ended in August, with cinematography work done by Tony Mirza and Helena Hutchins, before Hutchins worked on her final film, Rust. The production of Time Cut used unloaded guns, yet the firearms safety personnel still followed standard safety precautions to ensure the entire cast and crew was aware. Release: Time Cut was released on Netflix on October 30th, 2024. Reception. On the review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes, 13% of 16 critics' reviews are positive, with an average rating of 4/10. Metacritic, which uses a weighted average, assigned the film a score of 38 out of 100, based on 6 critics, indicating generally unfavorable reviews. Netflix has put out a new horror movie that has landed at number 2 in its top 10 list, The Day After Halloween. And unlike some actually pretty good Netflix original horror films, Time Cut is extremely bad. If you want to know whether or not Time Cut is worth watching, the answer is overwhelmingly no. It is very bad. Trust me. Or critics, or audiences. Here's the synopsis. A teen in 2024 accidentally time travels to 2003, days before a masked killer murders her sister. Can she change the past without destroying the future? It's a strange concept, as this is clearly a movie aimed at teens, where many of them weren't even born in 2003. And people that were in high school in 2003, like me, think this looks too juvenile, and also is a terrible half-hearted attempt at recreating 2003. You can throw in some Uggs and iPods, but the vibes aren't there. It just feels all wrong. The film has a dismal 14% on Rotten Tomatoes, as close to as low as we see Netflix originals go, and an also bad 40% audience score and a 5/10 on IMDb. The film feels like one of those algorithmic Netflix movies, where they throw in actors from other popular projects and see if it works. In this case, that is Outer Banks' Madison Bailey, Ginny and George's Antonia Gentry, and Lock and Key's Griffin Gluck. Like, it's just so obviously transparent that this was made by a focus group attempting to grab actors from its most popular teen-focused series and attempt to make this concept work. It does not. Here are some of the critic reviews about Time Cut, AV Club. It's a glancing blow of a snoozy slasher, far more interested in being a 2000s rewound comedy, meeting somewhere in the unenthusiastic middle. The rap, the time travel stuff, is mined for funny jokes for a few minutes, and then the film shows zero interest in all the worms it's uncanned. It's a whole lot of what-ifs, and not a lot of then-whats. Guardian. There's far too much focus on the particulars of time travel, as if we expect or want a film like this to be rooted in any actual science, and there's a laziness to how it handles the simple slasher beats. It's hard to make attention-grabbing horror movies in a crowded field. It's hard to make time travel movies that are remotely coherent. It may be close to impossible to combine them, and this movie feels like it didn't really have a chance. Skip it, and watch the much better film, Woman of the Hour, still at number 1 and with a 90% score on Netflix's top 10 list. Hannah MacPherson's Time Cut, now on Netflix, was reportedly in production before the remarkably similar Totally Killer. Still, the accusations that this film follows in that film's time-jumping footsteps are inevitable. But this film's failure can't be laid at the feet of a superior one. If that movie never existed, heck, if time-jump movies in general never existed, this would still be a bad movie. The comparisons don't help, but nothing could. Madison Bailey has been effective enough on Netflix's hit Outer Banks to believe she could carry a movie. Still, MacPherson has no idea how to direct her here, leading to a truly stranded, depressing lead performance. As Lucy Field, Bailey has 2.5 expressions: confused, scared, and scared confusion. She most often looks like she wishes she was in a better movie. Lucy plays an ordinary girl in 2024 whose sister Summer, the better Antonia Gentry, maybe the only performer in the film allowed to show a modicum of charisma, was murdered 2 decades earlier. It turns out that, after Summer's death, her parents tried so hard to replace her with another child that they went through IVF to do so. This will be important later, trust me. Through a truly random discovery, Lucy ends up going back in time to the days before her sister's murder, determined to find the serial killer who's been hunting Sweetly. The small problem? As the interminable discussion of what we've learned from Back to the Future and the Time Toaster segment from The Simpsons makes clear. If Summer never dies, then her parents won't have the desire to create Lucy. Would you save your sister if it meant you were never born? It's kind of a daring emotional minefield for a movie like this to explore, but MacPherson and co-writer Michael Kennedy are barely interested in doing so. Instead, they create false stakes they don't even truly follow through on, resulting in one of the most insane endings I've ever seen. As everyone just smiles and laughs like a B-movie that ran out of film during a reshoot. Most people won't make it to that ending. As Lucy runs around 2003 and the soundtrack drops bangers like Hilary Duff's So Yesterday and ogles the fashion of the era, Time Cut hits all the beats you expect it to hit. It's the kind of film that truly feels like a waste of a concept in that it produces no logical surprises or emotional stakes. Griffin Gluck, so great on American Vandal, man I miss that show, is wasted as a thankless cog in the machine of this plot, and no one else makes an impact. In fact, most of the supporting players feel amateur at best, and when an entire cast grates with awkward line delivery and non-characters, the blame must be placed on the director's inability to create an interesting world or give her characters anything worthwhile to do in it. The note I kept taking during Time Cut was clunky. And I'm a fan of dumb concept horror movies like this. I'm enjoying how people seem to find Happy Death Day every year, for example. It wasn't time-hopping, but the silly freaky was fun. There's so little fun here, feeling as if everyone is merely fulfilling an obligation. I was excited for another time jump movie with a twist. After this one, I just wanted my time back. Time Cut is a frustrating film twice over. On the one hand, it takes a genre conceit that should be a layup and sleepwalks right through it, in a way that implies the audience deserves no effort beyond what it took to get them to press play. As if those who love slashers or time travel movies are won over by premises alone, not the passion and creativity of their execution. Certain scenes left me feeling more insulted than disappointed. On the other hand, there is another, better movie buried within Time Cut that occasionally peeks through, and that I so desperately wanted to be watching. You never want to be left envisioning an alternate path for something you just finished, so clear to you that it becomes aggravating to think about what the film actually was. Still, I admire it for provoking the questions that it does, and I'm still trying to grapple with the cognitive dissonance of that. I apologize if, in trying to reconcile these reactions, my review leaves you feeling the same way. Time Cut wastes both its slasher and time travel elements. Creativity is missing here, and nothing works without it. In 2003, 4 teenagers were murdered by the Sweetly slasher, with Summer, Antonia Gentry, the final victim. In 2024, her sister Lucy, Madison Bailey, born after the killings, lives with the wreckage. The town is a shell of its formal self, most of its businesses shuttered. Lucy's parents seem stuck in a joyless holding pattern. They keep Summer's room perfectly intact and can process their living daughter's life only in terms of the potential for danger. When she wins a summer internship at NASA, they can only suggest the lab where her father works instead, closer to home. One day, in Summer's room, Lucy finds a seemingly threatening letter under her floorboards, signed E. The first and only clue in years. Then, on her family's annual pilgrimage to the shrine they've built where Summer died, she catches a mysterious flash of light coming from a nearby barn. She follows it, finds a mysterious machine, and, despite being set up to us as NASA smart, just presses the start button. One thing leads to another, and Lucy finds herself in 2003, on the day the murders began. The film is unable to sustain any tension and is seemingly afraid of its own potential for violence. To start with the bad, both the slasher and time travel portions of Time Cut are defined by laziness. They aspire to the bare minimum of function, lacking the ambition for fun or creativity required to stand out in either genre. The details of the case and the mechanics of the time machine are breezed through in clunky exposition and technobabble. Neither have any real bearing on the story. The nature and consequences of time travel, fertile ground for imaginative play, are left severely underbaked here. So much time is devoted to talking about fears of a universe-destroying paradox, a familiar cliché, but how many movies actually commit to that concept? We know someone will try to change the past anyway. There'd be no story otherwise, so why spend so long harping on what inevitably won't bear out? The horror sequences are even less successful. The film is unable to sustain any tension, and is seemingly afraid of its own potential for violence, despite gesturing toward the creative weapon choice that is practically a bar for entry into the slasher genre. The killer lacks any presence or personality, and, in part because of the rigidness of the time travel premise, has no real power to surprise. The character's design has an unfortunate resemblance to that of last year's Totally Killer, but with a less inspiring execution, which leaves it fairly toothless. I should linger on that comparison a moment. Time Cut and Totally Killer have remarkably similar premises, often separated by technicalities like sister versus mother, 2000s versus 1980s. Time Cut was announced and filmed first, but not only did Totally Killer beat it to market, it's also, while more good than great, clearly superior in every area I've dissected so far. I don't know quite what to make of this coincidence, except that Netflix's movie undoubtedly suffers from its competitor's existence. Lucy's family status is the best part of Time Cut. I wish this had been the whole movie. And yet, Time Cut makes one fascinating choice that could have really set it apart, had it been properly foregrounded. Lucy has a complicated relationship to this traumatic event, having been raised in its shadow. She's eager to finally meet the sister she's only lived with as a ghost, and she finds Summer easy to love. But she also discovers her living a much sunnier life. Her parents are warm, caring, and encouraging. Truly happy. They welcome Lucy in, thinking her a friend of Summer's, and they widen their umbrella of care when they sense in Lucy a less than nurturing home life. Those are heavy, thorny questions to go with heavy, thorny feelings. They give stretches of Time Cut real weight. Bailey plays these scenes with a mournful touch that seems out of step with so much of what the film is doing, but also so much more compelling. Lucy asks her unwitting parents if they've ever considered having a second child, and with a loving glance at Summer, they tell her no. One was always all they needed. And given how dialogue eventually confirms Lucy was no accident, the film is remarkably frank about the fact that she was born to fill the hole left by Summer's death. They just don't have it in them to love her on her own terms. With the nature of time travel unclear, Lucy is concerned about how intervening in the killings will change the future, and Summer's murder is by far the most troubling. It's clear to her that if Summer lives, her parents will never have her. Her life is sad, but clearly full of potential. Is she willing to trade it for her family to be happy without her? Summer, who isn't kept in the dark very long and gets close to Lucy, faces a similar conundrum. Can she accept her own death if it means her sister gets to exist? Those are heavy, thorny questions to go with heavy, thorny feelings. They give stretches of time cut real weight, far more than I would have thought possible after watching the rest of it. I can't help but think about how interesting it would have been to have this thread be the movie. How rich the characters and themes could have become. It would have put a headier, sci-fi spin on the slasher format, instead of the nominal genre splicing we got. I have to give the movie credit for planting this seed. But it doesn't rescue the rest of what's on screen. Time Cut attempts to bring audiences back to 2003 with a blend of Back to the Future-style time travel and slasher horror, starring Madison Bailey as Lucy, Antonia Gentry as her older sister Summer, Michael Shanks as their father Gil, and Griffin Gluck as Quinn, a would-be killer. But despite its nostalgic angle, the movie's portrayal of the early 2000s feels like a misguided caricature rather than a genuine callback to the era. Having actually lived through 2003, I can say that Time Cut tries to recreate the vibe of that period in a way that misses the mark entirely. Instead of capturing the real elements of the time, such as the Iraq War, the rise of 50 Cent and G-Unit, Beyoncé's Crazy in Love, that Uh-Oh song by Lou McGee, Jay-Z's first retirement, the rise of competitive Smash Bros. Tournaments, the blackout in New York City, Madonna and Britney Spears, and Madonna's kiss at the MTV Video Music Awards, and even the launch of Def Jam Vendetta, the movie settles for over-the-top brand placements that feel more like a shopping catalog than a time capsule. Not to say that is what I was expecting, but those are the first things I think of 2003. There's even a moment where a character holds a CD player like it's a smartphone. Yes, I just said that. The time travel logic also crumbles quickly. For instance, if Lucy's entire mission is to save Summer, why does she save Quinn from being thrown into a river, effectively stopping the very event that turned him into a killer? This one change should erase his motivation, but it somehow doesn't, leading to a paradox that only further unravels the plot. Movies with time travel demand precision, yet Time Cut skips over essential details, leaving viewers with questions that distract from any potential suspense. The slasher scenes also fall flat. We learn next to nothing about the victims, apart from the fact that they're friends of Summer, so it's hard to care about their fates. There's minimal tension throughout, even in moments that should be suspenseful, like the final confrontation with the killer. Instead, the scene wraps up abruptly with no real sense of closure. Additionally, the film relies heavily on exposition, making it feel as though critical scenes were edited out, leaving gaps in both the plot and character development. For instance, Lucy's eventual return to 2024 is skimmed over in a throwaway line instead of being shown. Moreover, Lucy's character arc feels contradictory. Despite delivering speeches on living in the present, she's still stuck in 2003 at the end of the movie, a twist that seems less intentional than simply careless. And Quinn's motivations as a killer are almost laughably thin. He apparently invents time travel to get revenge for a high school rejection decades earlier, which would require him to know he's the killer in the first place. A nonsensical twist that's easy to predict, since his killer persona is telegraphed from his first appearance, making the supposed suspense fall completely flat. In the end, Time Cut stumbles in nearly every area, from its superficial nostalgia to its flimsy character motivations and plot inconsistencies. Rather than taking viewers on a nostalgic, suspenseful journey, it falls into a series of tropes that neither capture the early 2000s nor deliver a compelling horror experience. Plot: a high school student accidentally travels back to 2003 and decides to stop the serial killer who murdered her sister. Review: time travel and slashers seem to go together like peanut butter and jelly, as this is now the second major streaming release in the last year to feature this paean. Back to the Future meets Scream aesthetic. As such, I'm sure there are some that would immediately roll their eyes at the idea of approaching the subject matter again. But I'm not one of those people. Just like slasher movies, I'll take as much time travel shenanigans as you'll offer. And Time Cut certainly has plenty to offer. Time Cut follows Lucy as she lives a fairly sheltered life. Her sis was murdered 20 years prior, causing her parents to go a bit overboard with their protection of her. But when Lucy goes back in time, she may be able to save her sister and finally live her life. Lucy is a fairly generic lead, though I wouldn't say it's Madison Bailey's fault. The script just doesn't do her any favors in giving her much personality. Despite her being bland, I still enjoyed Lucy as Bailey just has a likability to her. Too bad the writing just doesn't support her well. Griffin Gluck is really fun and is the stereotypical nerd of the story. His character arc isn't unexpected, but it's pulled off well. In terms of time travel, Time Cut seems to break every rule in the book. From constantly telling people about their futures to interacting with nearly everyone, it's like they've never even heard of the butterfly effect. But there's a simplistic approach to the actual time travel that works really well. It's not some big, elaborate event. It just sort of happens, and there's no questioning of it. It helps that the digital effects work is well handled and never goes overboard. As a millennial, I got a big kick out of the very early 2000s soundtrack. Even the costumes were a complete nostalgia kick, with bejeweled jeans, double collars, and Uggs getting their moment. Lucy is conflicted because the only reason she was born was due to her sister's death, so she has to contend with saving her sister and potentially not existing. My favorite element of the story was the change in the parents from present to past. Shows how much the death of their daughter completely changed who they are as people. I have to admit, I was a little perplexed at all of the similarities between Time Cut and Prime's Totally Killer. And like that film, the complete lack of intervention in kills from the past makes the time travel feel a bit pointless. Even the killer design is nearly the exact same. If someone told me this was in the same universe, I would believe them. The kills end up being really generic and could fit in with most CW fare, with brief stabbings lacking in impact. I was hoping they were ramping up to a big finale, but it ended up being fairly tame. As much as it seems like it would be, this hardly even takes the slasher approach. The killings have little weight to them, and it just feels like we're waiting for the eventual killer reveal. And, obviously, we can't get into that because of spoilers, but I did find it very satisfying, if not predictable. Not everything needs to come out of left field. Lucy falls in with the 2003 crowd a little too easily, without much questioning of her mysterious entrance into their lives. They're very accepting of Lucy's absurd story, but it does allow us to get past the stereotypical, convincing I'm telling the truth scene. And the killer reveal is very obvious, to say the least. Anyone with even an inkling of whodunit knowledge will immediately know. But it's still handled in an interesting way that I wouldn't say that it destroys the film. Writer Michael Kennedy continues his streak of putting an out-of-nowhere gay relationship in his scripts. Inclusiveness in film is a good thing, but it's made Kennedy's scripts extremely predictable and boring. Maybe if they weren't treated as twists when they're so obvious, they wouldn't be as cliché. Maybe just treat them as humans versus a box that needs to be checked for marketing. As is, it just makes the film come across as tired. Add to it that it's very similar to another horror film released last year, and it's hard to care. While I always enjoy time travel stories, Time Cut is very hit or miss. There are some really interesting ideas introduced in the second half, but the first half is so generic that it's hard to maintain interest. It fits in well with other time travel-y stories like Happy Death Day, but it pales in comparison to the very similar Totally Killer. With a boring lead, very little violence, and horror that feels non-existent at points, Hannah MacPherson's Time Cut rehashes a slasher thriller and a time travel trope to painfully boring, contrived ends. The writing recycles every conceivable cliché and emotions dry up quickly, despite a pretty big sentimental hook to the narrative. Buried deep within is a story of sisters finding a connection. There's scope for trauma addressing and coming to terms with grief, but the film barely steps into it. Instead, what we get is an overwrought yet anemic film that reverse engineers temporalities only to render a flat, unconvincing, and wooden plotline. The screenplay piles on a series of convenient narrative turns that don't even latch onto a plausible thread. There's no attempt made to spin a decent explanation, though we gauge gestures being made towards it through introducing a company that has link-ups with the time machine. It's all very casually hamstrung a plot with the passage of time being made to expressly reflect on the clothes and technology. This has to be spelled out by the film, besides a contrast between the present-day bleak color palette and a bright, shiny past. The filmmaking is lazy, saddled with a slop of generic imagination and fleshing out emotionally driven scenes. The performances, too, are in the mold of sleepwalking. Madison Bailey flashes an anguished expression throughout. There's no palpable danger we feel, despite a lurking serial killer. Time cut 2024. Plot summary and movie synopsis, exploring time travel and tension in a flawed serial killer thriller. A serial killer-centric tale must at least keep you nervous and apprehensive. Of course, here we already know who gets killed right off the cuff, so that scope for nervous, dread-infused anticipation doesn't exactly boil to the surface. Here, the murders are sought to be stopped. Time travel factors in heavily, though the science and logic behind it are mostly missing. There's a lot of reiterated emphasis on not messing with the temporal flow of events and circumstances, as it might send off a vast, uncontrollable ripple effect. There might be a series of paradoxes set off in the process. How can one circumvent the passage of time when one is aware of the immense repercussions that could be triggered? The price might be unfathomably steep. The film invokes this several times but shows no acumen to probe it with any intelligence or depth. Can Lucy's discovery of the time machine change her sister's fate? Time Cut opens in April of 2003. A serial killer, the Sweetly Slasher, is on the loose. Summerfield, Antonia Gentry, has 2 of her friends killed. She is grieving the loss but can't really share the depth of it with anyone. She escapes a party, only to run into a cabin where she gets attacked and subsequently killed by the masked slasher. The film jumps 20 years following these events. The town is hollowed out, the vibrance of life has gone missing. Everything looks bleached of vivacity and life. We meet Summer's sister, Lucy, Madison Bailey. The parents' grief is still fresh. They adopted her to recover from the loss, but her life is severely curtailed in the fear that they might lose her as well. She lands a NASA internship. However, she knows her parents wouldn't welcome the idea of going away on her own to a faraway place, even if for a few months. A peculiar twist occurs in the film. She and her parents arrive to put fresh flowers on the anniversary of Summer's death. She strays to a cabin nearby where she comes across a curious machine, tucked away. It has these flares. She tinkers with it and lands in the past. It's April of 2003. The machine is a time travel conduit. Can Lucy and Quinn outwit time to save Summer and her friends from the Sweetly Slasher? Lucy ventures to her school, hoping to find a familiar face in her physics teacher. She is introduced to the resident physics nerd Quinn, Griffin Gluck. It's his trust she first garners. She convinces him she is from the future. Since he is already invested in the mechanics of time travel, it isn't a mighty hard task, given she also shows him her share of tech. She also meets Summer at school. Quinn suggests that she do Summer's homework when Summer asks him for help. Lucy tells him everything about her family history, though she holds back on the entire list of the deaths. Quinn insists she doesn't meddle with the course of events, pressing on her the fact it might set off too many paradoxes in motion. But she is determined. She paces to the mall to save Val and Brian, friends of Summer. She is almost able to rescue one of them, but loses both to the killer. What shakes her up is that there's another casualty in the death of a security guard who tried to intervene and got attacked. Summer finally decides to believe in Lucy once she gets proof. It's she who insists on Lucy, and they save Emmy, who is the next victim. The trio heads to the Marine Museum where Emmy works the evening shift. They arrive just in the nick of time and extricate her from the clutches of the killer. Lucy discovers Summer is romantically drawn to Emmy, but cannot quite own up to it. Gradually, Summer picks the courage as Emmy also likes her. Time cut, 2024. Movie ending explained. Will Lucy's sacrifice secure a new future for her and Summer? Lucy is conflicted about saving Summer, since it also might ensure she doesn't have her own future. Ultimately, her sisterly love prevails as she concocts a plan. On the fateful day, just about Summer enters the cabin where she would get attacked by the killer, Lucy and Quinn ram a car at him, impeding his advance. He is immobilized temporarily, but not killed. The killer is revealed to be a future version of Quinn from another timeline, one in which Lucy wasn't there to be a safe space for him amidst the bullying he faced at school. He also couldn't stomach being rejected by Summer. Lucy drags the future Quinn into the future, where she kills him. But she returns to the past, where she can be with her sister and the unsullied Quinn. In the end, which is a happy one, she applies for a NASA internship in 2003, surrounded and bolstered by family and love. Even the stars of Time Cut were surprised to learn the identity of the film's masked killer. I like to predict who the killer is, what's going to happen, what's the next jump scare. Antonia Gentry, Ginny in Georgia, who plays high school student and murder victim Summer, tells Tudum. I was surprised. Her co-star and on-screen younger sister agrees. I was shocked. Madison Bailey, Outer Banks, tells Tudum. But it also made a lot of sense to me. Even the stars of Time Cut were surprised to learn the identity of the film's masked killer. I like to predict who the killer is, what's going to happen, what's the next jump scare. Antonia Gentry, Ginny in Georgia, who plays high school student and murder victim Summer, tells Tudum. I was surprised. Her co-star and on-screen younger sister agrees. I was shocked. Madison Bailey, Outer Banks, tells Tudum. But it also made a lot of sense to me. Who killed Summer? As the film's third act reveals, Summer's killer is none other than the future self of her classmate Quinn, Griffin Gluck, a bullied teen who befriends Lucy Bailey when she travels back in time. But why did the affable nerd snap? To explain that, we'll have to travel back or forward in time ourselves. When the film opens in the present day, Lucy lives in the shadow of her older sister Summer. 20 years prior, Summer was murdered by a masked killer, one of 4 who died in the Sweetly killings. Lucy never met her sister, and her family has never quite recovered from her death. When the bright young teen stumbles onto a time machine, she's catapulted back to 2003. I'm going back and meeting this sister who I'd never met before, and I'm seeing this light in her and connecting the dots of my own life, Bailey says of her character's journey. As she and Summer grow closer, Lucy becomes convinced that she has to prevent her sister's murder, at any cost. Lucy was born out of her parents' grief. If Summer survives, she may never exist. Lucy has to literally choose between her sister's life and her own existence, MacPherson says. I just thought that was so brilliant, to be able to dig into the thematics of family. What are we willing to sacrifice? Even as she's fighting to protect Summer, Lucy also alters history even further, rescuing Quinn from being dropped into a river by a group of bullies. In Summer's timeline, this incident pushed Quinn down a path towards vengeance. His future self traveled back in time and killed Summer and her classmates for laughing at him. We get to look at the opportunities that changed his life forever, MacPherson says. One person reaching out and becoming a friend where there was no friend can make a difference. Lucy's act of goodwill splits the timeline. The Quinn of the past remains good-natured, while the Quinn of the future becomes the time-traveling Sweetly slasher, wreaking bloody revenge on his one-time tormentors. Does Lucy save Summer? Yes. After a heated confrontation, Lucy stabs future Quinn through the heart, ending his reign of terror. Past Quinn is free to continue his life on the correct path. The scenes that feature Gluck as both past and future Quinn were filmed in only one night. He had to play opposite himself, MacPherson says. That was really fun to work out with the camera and his stunt double and his acting double, and also just a huge challenge for him in one night. To make Quinn look 20 years older, the production employed prosthetic aging makeup, but the real magic trick was Gluck himself. He's really a chameleon, MacPherson says. Finally, Summer and Lucy are free to live happily ever after. In 2003, of course, as Lucy's timeline no longer exists, Summer also finally embraces her romantic relationship with her classmate, Emmy, Megan Best. All's well that ends well and sweetly. But it wasn't the only possibility for the film's ending. We had a variety of different options for endings, including both sisters being alive in the present day, MacPherson says. Summer would have been 20 years older than Lucy, but they were still both alive. We just felt that image of 45-year-old Summer and teenage Lucy wasn't as happy as the two girls as teenagers getting to experience life together. It just felt so good, time travel logic be damned. For her part, Gentry got to play both the film's first victim and one of its final girls. Best of both worlds, she says. I had a bucket list where I was like, I want to be slashed. She got her wish and got to live happily ever after. The streamer's gimmicky and overfamiliar Halloween offering sees a teen going back to 2003 to save her sister from a masked killer. The triumphant return of the slasher movie, a subgenre that had been mostly dead and buried for far too long, arrived with key caveats. Those that were now being made were either part of a legacy franchise, updates to Scream or Halloween or next year's I Know What You Did Last Summer, or were hinged on a goofy gimmick. We had time loops, the Happy Death Day series, time travel, Totally Killer, timeline jumping, the excellent Fear Street trilogy, alternate realities, It's a Wonderful Knife, or body swapping, the underrated Freaky, brash genre-bending variations that all seemed a little reticent to rely solely on the base pleasures of the formula. What had seemed inventive at the outset has started to become predictably repetitive, as evidenced by Netflix's ho-hum teen offering Time Cut, a film that almost feels like the Scary Movie parody of this recent trend. To be fair to those behind it, it was filmed back in 2021. It has that familiar, 10-person crowd COVID movie vibe, but even if its conceit were fresher, there's not enough else here to merit that prized Halloween viewing slot. Keep scrolling. Martha Review. Sharp if spotty, Netflix retrospective on Martha Stewart. Read more. In a 2003 set cold open that tells us everything we need to know about what's to come, bad lighting, zero suspense, nostalgic needle drop, we see the high schooler Summer, Ginny and George's Antonia Gentry, get murdered by a masked killer. The latest in what we're told is a spree targeting her friends. We leap forward to 2024 and her sister Lucy, Outer Banks' Madison Bailey, is still dealing with the loss. They never met. She was born just 2 years after. But the house is still haunted. Her room an untouched shrine, their parents obsessively overprotective. And on the anniversary of her death, Lucy engages in a familiar ritual to pay tribute to her in the place where she was killed. But this year, Lucy encounters a strange machine that zaps her back to the week before her sister's death, and she must try to find a way to change history. David Cronenberg and body horror. Kevin Williamson and postmodern slashers. With credits including Happy Death Day, review here, It's a Wonderful Knife, review here, and now Time Cut under their belts. Co-writer Michael Kennedy and producer Christopher Landon appear to be making their names synonymous with time travel whodunits, whether they ever intended to or not. Welcome to 2003, a time when Buffy the Vampire Slayer was on TV, Norah Jones was all over the radio, and Lucy Field's sister Summer was still alive, although not for long. Despite 3 of her friends dying over the past 2 days at the hands of a killer who hasn't been caught, Summer decides to commiserate with classmates at a beer-filled barnyard bash. Summer barely has time for brief encounters with nerdy nebbish Quinn and her ex-boyfriend Ethan when unfun cops arrive to break up the party. Left alone, Summer has one more encounter, this time with the masked murderer who makes her his 4th and final victim. Flash forward to 2024. One way Summer's parents coped with their daughter's death was to give birth to Lucy, who essentially picks up where Summer left off as a high school senior, but 21 years later. Lucy feels like her loner life has been defined by Summer's death, so she sees herself as a misfit whose chronically unhappy parents can't even share her enthusiasm over a NASA scholarship. In keeping with their somber spirits, Lucy's parents bring her to the farm where their previous daughter died to honor the anniversary of Summer's death. Inside a barn, Lucy finds an odd machine. Curious, she presses a button. Mechanical arms raise, lasers activate, and Lucy disappears in a blinding light. Welcome back to 2003. Quickly realizing she inexplicably traveled back in time to the day when the killing spree started, Lucy takes her next trip to her high school, where she silently gasps at novelties like low-rise jeans and flip phones the way Marty McFly marveled at pompadour hairstyles and diner waitresses on roller skates. For viewers above a certain age, it's either amusing or depressing to see the film treat 2003 as nostalgia, with close-ups on portable CD players and MP3 devices seemingly joking. Remember how unsightly our bulky technology was? What a wild time to have been alive. Don't worry if that visual gag makes you feel old. Time Cut's era-related jokes aren't always about quaintness. A couple of smirks can come from laugh-worthy lines about a problematic president, the terrifying sound of a dial-up modem, and how long Olive Garden has been serving unlimited breadsticks. Not only does Lucy need to find her way back to 2024, she needs to save her sister Summer. Or does she? Lucy realizes if Summer survives, she'll never be born, presenting such a paradoxical conundrum. Lucy can't even summon the strength to tell her sister who she really is, much less reveal how savagely Summer is soon to be slaughtered. Setting things straight can wait a while, though. First, let's see the sisters bond in a "why do you dress so weirdly" makeover montage. It needs to be noted, Time Cut isn't just centered around high school students. The movie is tailored for teenagers. Anyone outside of the target demographic's sweet spot may be too busy counting copious Michelle Branch, Vanessa Carlton, and Wheatus needle drops to ever get into the traditional slasher or sweetly sentimental sides of the story. Curious staging might also rock a rickety boat of immersion in the film's fantasy. Like when Lucy finally tells Summer she's from the future, their subsequent interaction barely lasts more than a minute before Lucy abruptly leaves the room. "I'm sorry, you just dropped an incredible bombshell. Maybe you could stick around longer than 60 seconds and answer a couple of questions. Yeah?" The positive impact of Time Cut cutting narrative corners and possibly entire subplots is the movie moves swiftly and consistently in the interest of maintaining a runtime under 90 minutes. There aren't many suspects for the murders, and there aren't many possible motives known to the viewer either, so guessing the killer's identity isn't much of a game. Especially when you look back at earlier events after certain reveals, the fiction doesn't fully hold up. It never does with time travel treks or murder mysteries. You just have to accept certain leaps in logic and realize this isn't Time Crimes, review here, or Knives Out. This is a fun-focused, breezy thriller for those who don't need their minds blown to be entertained. Let's put it this way. If I had to sum up Time Cut in one word, I'd compliment the movie by calling it cute. That's not a particularly attractive term for hardcore horror fans to hear, but everyone else who has no problem with a fright flick that feels like Lizzie McGuire decided to get dark with a PG-13 Halloween special should do just fine. Ever since Time Cut was announced by Netflix, there have been mixed reactions, mostly due to the fact that a time-traveling slasher came out a year prior through Prime Video called Totally Killer. The film starring Kiernan Shipka has her character transported back to the 80s to save her mother's best friends from a masked killer on the loose. Similarly, Time Cut, headed by Madison Bailey, Outer Banks, also follows its protagonist rewinding to a different point in time to prevent history from repeating itself. Although the plots for both titles seem pretty close to one another, the Netflix film was actually filmed during the pandemic, with its release delayed to this year. Considering that the similarities between them are mere coincidence, the project, directed by Hannah MacPherson, is a tender story between two siblings who connect under unusual circumstances. However, in focusing on the budding bond between them, the film's horror elements are left on the back burner. Time Cut centers on Lucy Field Bailey, an up-and-coming scientist who has just learned that she's been selected to do an internship at NASA. Despite being over the moon about her dreams coming true, her parents don't seem as excited about her accomplishment. Instead of encouraging her to pursue this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, they glance at each other and begin to list some of the reasons why they would prefer her not to venture out of their hometown. Their reaction is primarily influenced by the grief they are still processing from the death of their eldest daughter Summer, Ginny and George's Antonia Gentry, who was murdered in cold blood by a slasher back in 2003. While paying respects on the anniversary of her death, Lucy accidentally stumbles upon a time-traveling machine and is transported to days before the gut-wrenching incident. After meeting her sister at school and finally getting to know her beyond the pictures hanging on the walls of her home, the protagonist becomes determined to save the siblings she's finally gotten to meet. Yet, in doing so, she risks the chances of her own survival, given that her parents wouldn't have had her if they hadn't lost their firstborn. Madison Bailey and Antonia Gentry's chemistry anchors Time Cut. Although Time Cut is a slasher, it winds up being much more sentimental than audiences would initially presume. That is in part because of the chemistry between Bailey and Gentry as the main duo. From their first interaction, the idea that they are siblings just getting to know each other is conceivable because their on-screen portrayal comes off as genuine. One can't help but feel drawn to their growing friendship, even though they've only hung out together for just a few days. Lucy's makeover scene in Summer's bedroom, putting on heart-shaped sunglasses and low-rise jeans, is a standout moment between them, because it not only shows how organic their relationship is, but also tips the hat for a type of sequence that was integral to an early 2000s movie. It might be nerve-wracking to think that a time-traveling movie would consider 2003 enough of a throwback, but maybe that is because I grew up watching coming-of-age projects that came out during or close enough to that year. What a Girl Wants, Freaky Friday, the Lizzie McGuire movie, I could go on and on about how formative these films were to me. So when Lucy lands in 2003 and roams the hallways filled with students wearing juicy culture tracksuits, tennis shoes with squeaky wheels, and colorful hair clips, the sights are a blast to the past. Having Hilary Duff's So Yesterday playing in the background when Lucy spots her sister walking by was the icing on top of the cake. The wardrobe and needle drops in Time Cut make the early 2000s just as iconic as the 80s or 90s, even though it feels like yesterday that flip phones were on trend. Yet, beneath the welcoming nostalgic feel, the film is in its essence a slasher. The killer is about to go after the 4 students, who Lucy knows will be murdered shortly. That is if she can prevent that from happening altogether, with the help of a school outcast, played by Griffin Gluck. When it comes to Time Cut's horror undertones, the project barely scratches the surface when it comes to the gore and dramatization of the murders at hand. This comes as a surprise considering that Michael Kennedy, responsible for the excellent Freaky and last year's enjoyable It's a Wonderful Knife, wrote the film's script alongside MacPherson. Except for the events that take place in the mall, there are barely any memorable screams, thrilling chases, or reveals. As a whole, Netflix's latest spooky release is better off as a time-traveling tale of 2 sisters living in an alternate reality where they are both alive than a gripping slasher. Its emphasis on nostalgia and the bond between the main siblings detours from the film's horror elements, making the few instances where the killer strikes less impactful. Nonetheless, if you are hoping to double down on the gore this Halloween season, this delightful, yet cheesy title will fit the bill. It might be forgettable, but it can also offer the comforting feeling that the early 2000s captured so well. Time Cut, now on Netflix, is a combination slasher time travel flick starring Madison Bailey and Antonia Gentry as sisters who meet each other for the first time when one travels back in time to prevent the other's murder. Perhaps this goes without saying. It's complicated. So yes, this is one of those plots that takes us down to the Paradox City, where the grass is green and the implications on the space-time continuum are potentially disastrous. But can director Hannah MacPherson and her co-writer Michael Kennedy, Freaky, take us home? The gist: Sweetly, Minnesota, April 18, 2003. 3 high schoolers have just been slashed up by a slasher killer, and yet the spring fling show must go on. Summerfield Gentry isn't too happy about this. Those 3 high schoolers were her friends, and nobody but the sweet dweeb in a D&D shirt, Quinn, Griffin Gluck, gives a dang. Almost immediately after Summer says, "Seems like I'm the only one who's afraid of a serial killer." She goes off all alone to the bathroom, which is a terrible decision, because the slasher killer in a Ken or at least Ken-like mask and hoodie, comes after her with a Rambo, or at least Rambo-like knife. He misses, so he chases her into a barn where there's a Reaper's, or at least Reaper-like scythe propped up against a wall. He doesn't miss this time. Now it's April 18th, 2024. Lucy Field landed an internship at NASA, but her parents aren't so sure about letting her go have an amazing astronaut life or whatever. See, they've been really overprotective since Summer got scythed 21 years ago. Summer's room is a time capsule of 2003, complete with a Buffy poster, CD boombox, and newspaper clippings about the murder, which is something they wouldn't save if they were of sound mind, but what do I know? I'm no psychologist. The Sweetly slasher never killed anyone again, and the murders remain unsolved, but there's a loose floorboard in Summer's room, and beneath it are handwritten letters that seem like capital C clues. She and Mother and Father Field. Why didn't they name their second daughter Springfield? Blown opportunity. Venture to the site of the murder to pay respects on the anniversary, and Lucy wanders into a barn and stumbles across a time machine, and Zappo. She's shot back to April 16, 2003. Now, if you're curious as to exactly why this happens, I recommend not asking, because even though it's eventually explained, it's not at all satisfying. Just go with it, is what I'm saying. Anyway, you're doing some math now. If Lucy is a senior in 2024 and Summer was a senior in 2003, then Mother and Father Field may have conceived their second daughter in a frenzy of grief, and possibly with some medicinal help, since 2+ decades between children is unusual. Don't worry, I won't go further down that hole because there's too many spoilers in it. Very stupid spoilers. She finds Quinn, and since he's a physics genius, she tells him about the time travel inconvenience, and after he says, "What's Twitter?" and "Is Paris Hilton still hot?" he agrees to help her. First by feeding her a popular name-brand candy bar, whose logo is the subject of the movie's finest photography, and then by warning her of the potential disruption of timeline continuity if she follows through on her attempt to prevent the Sweetly slasher from sweetly slashing her sister. While she contemplates that, she futzes with things anyway by meeting Summer and hanging with their parents, creating some complicated feelings and allowing for some insane dialogue, such as, "I'm your sister, I just haven't been born yet, and we're not altering the future, we're just giving it a makeover, like in She's All That," and "Let's go steal some antimatter." Now, if only Time Cut was as much fun as I'm making it out to be. So it goes, I guess. So it goes. What movies will it remind you of? Time Cut really wants to be Back to the Future meets Scream, but Totally Killer executed this premise far more amusingly, and with fewer trips to the popular soup and breadsticks restaurant whose logo is the subject of the movie's second most fine photography. It also feels like Netflix trying to replicate the success of Fear Street and/or The Babysitter. Performance worth watching. Bailey and Gentry are excellent actors who share one nice moment as long-lost sisters who yearn for things, but they're far too often stuck in a dumbass sloppo plot that does them no favors. Our take. With a little elbow grease, Time Cut could have been a real mind-bender that wavers wildly between amusing nostalgia fetishism and dark existential ruminations. We have Wheatus needle drops and outrageous oddies fashion mingling with Lucy's realization that, if she prevents her sister's death, her parents likely won't try to have another kid. And that means her. She might find herself in the great nothingness of unexistence, it seems. How selfless is she? What are her options? What's her life worth? There are so many questions and so little interest in where they lead, because there's a jank-ass plot here, and it clearly takes precedence over all those boring ideas. I mean, who wants to think about things around here? Thinking is for squares, man. And so the film blows past one creatively lucrative opportunity after another, like they're orange cones in a construction zone. Time Cut consists of piles of period-specific references, sans humor, heavy drama without depth, and characters without much going on in their interior lives. Example: a scene in which an American Psycho DVD is used as a weapon would have been much funnier if the killer pulled the disc out of a red Netflix mailer envelope. This is also the type of movie where a third-act confrontation in 2024 absolutely must involve some piece of era-specific ephemera, so an electric car charger ends up being used as a blunt weapon. Is that a joke? I think it's supposed to be. Now, having the character use a same-sex marriage license as a blunt weapon? That'd be funny. This is a long way of saying that Time Cut is lazy, and it sucks. Visually, it's flat and dull, like cheapo cable TV. And the screenplay is such a mess. It compromises comedy and drama on either tonal end, landing on middle-of-the-road bland mush that feels tamed for younger audiences, and a slap-together, underexplained conclusion that would be utterly batshit if I typed it out. But in execution, comes off as a big ol' shrug. Any opportunity the filmmakers had to extract any fun from the premise seems to have been hurdled just to get this thing over with. Viewers will surely feel the same. Directed by Hannah MacPherson. Screenplay by Michael Kennedy. Hannah MacPherson, story by Michael Kennedy, produced by Matt Kaplan. Christopher Landon, starring Madison Bailey, Antonia Gentry, Griffin Gluck, cinematography Tony Mirza, edited by Ken Blackwell, Joe Landauer. Music by Anna Drubich. Production company Ace Entertainment. Distributed by Netflix. Release date October 30th, 2024. Running time 92 minutes. Language English. Oh guys, this is the review of Time Trap movie and some information about it. How do you like our today's video? Please let us know by commenting, and if you like this video, please like it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.